You know what's funny about people? About the vast majority of them, anyway. They never see the trap until it's already sprung. They stumble in, eyes wide with some concocted fantasy, and only when the jaws clench shut do they realize the gravity of their miscalculation. My son, bless his naive heart, was no exception. He was walking straight into one of the most meticulously crafted snares I'd ever witnessed, and he was doing it with a smile on his face, a sparkle in his eyes, and a diamond ring in his pocket. But I couldn't let it happen. Not to him. Not again. My name is Art Blackwood. Arthur, if you're feeling formal, which almost no one ever is these days. And if you looked at me now, sitting in this worn armchair in my quiet, unassuming house on the outskirts of Greenwich, Connecticut, you'd see nothing remarkable. Just an older man, maybe mid-60s, a little rough around the edges, with a grizzled beard and hands that still bear the calluses of a life spent building things. A comfortable, modest retirement, you'd think. Maybe an old construction contractor, perhaps a retired foreman who saved up enough to enjoy his golden years with a good book and a strong cup of coffee. That's the image I cultivated, the one I let most people see. It's effective. People tend to underestimate you when they think they've got you pegged. They see the surface and they dismiss the depths. And for my purposes, that's exactly what I needed. My son Ethan, he's a good kid. 30 years old, sharp as a tack, running the architectural firm I bequeathed to him a few years back. He's got my drive, my vision, but he lacks a certain cynicism. A healthy dose of suspicion, you might call it. He sees the best in people, a trait I both admire and find utterly terrifying. Because the world's sun isn't always full of the best. Sometimes it's teeming with wolves in sheep's clothing, and they'll pick you clean before you even realize you're bleeding. I learned that lesson the hard way, more times than I care to admit. It cost me dearly once, almost everything, and I swore I'd never let it happen to my boy. So, when Ethan burst through my door 6 months ago, his face alight with a joy I hadn't seen since his mother. Well, since his mother passed, holding out a diamond ring and babbling about Vivianne Sterling, my internal alarm bells weren't just ringing. They were blaring like a fire truck racing through Times Square. Dad, she said yes. Can you believe it? Vivianne and I are getting married. He was beaming, pure, unadulterated happiness radiating from him. And there she was, standing just behind him, a vision in a perfectly tailored dress, a smile that could melt glaciers, and eyes that held just a touch too much calculation. Vivianne. Viv. Everyone called her Viv. She worked in some high-end art gallery in Manhattan, curated charity events, spoke 3 languages, and seemed to float through life on a cloud of effortless grace. On paper, she was everything a man could want. Beautiful, intelligent, charming, impeccably dressed. She had that polished Greenwich Country Club aura, the kind that screamed old money, even if I knew her family was more aspirational than truly established. She was perfect, too perfect. I met her a few times, of course. Lunches, dinners. She was always attentive, always asking about my retirement, praising Ethan's work, making me feel like the most important man in the room. And every time, a little knot of unease tightened in my gut. It wasn't anything she said or did specifically. It was the lack of anything real. It was the way her eyes, while sparkling, never quite settled. It was the faint, almost imperceptible flicker when she thought no one was looking, a predatory glint that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I'd seen that look before. In boardrooms, in back alleys, across poker tables. It was the look of someone sizing up their next meal. My gut, you see, it's not just a gut. It's an 80-pound mainframe of algorithms, compiled over decades of navigating treacherous waters. When it screams, I listen. And it was screaming about Vivianne. Loudly. I couldn't just tell Ethan. He was head over heels. He'd dismiss it as an old man's paranoia, a father's overprotective streak. He'd probably be right, too, from his perspective. What proof did I have? A gut feeling? A fleeting glance? No, this required something more. Something undeniable. Something that would rip the mask off and expose the truth, even if that truth shattered his world. Because a shattered world is better than a ruined life. That's when the idea formed. A terrible, brilliant, utterly agonizing plan. To see the true measure of a person, you don't give them everything. You take it away. You strip yourself bare, make yourself utterly vulnerable, and then you watch. You watch how they treat the weak, the helpless, the inconvenient. You watch when they think no one is watching. I decided to become a burden. A sick, frail, demanding, utterly useless burden. A ghost of my former self, a shadow of the man who built empires. I decided to fake my own demise, at least metaphorically, to simulate a catastrophic stroke, a debilitating accident that would leave me confined to a wheelchair, mostly incoherent, a drain on anyone who had to care for me. I'd become the ultimate inconvenience, the ultimate test. The preparations were meticulous. A few carefully orchestrated incidents, a sudden dizzy spell during my morning walk, a stumble down a few steps, a subtle slurring of speech during a family dinner, conveniently when Ethan was out of the room. My old friend and confidant, Jessica Rawlings, a woman who had navigated more legal minefields than most generals have battlefields, was the only one in on the secret. She's the kind of woman who could get a ghost to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She arranged for me to see a discreet specialist, a friend of a friend, an actor in this grim play, who would diagnose my rapidly deteriorating neurological condition. A slow, agonizing decline. Something that required constant care. Something that would disrupt Ethan's life and, more importantly, Vivianne's perfect vision of her future. Ethan, of course, was devastated. His face, usually so open, crumpled with grief. "Dad, what happened? The doctors, are they sure?" He believed every word, every stage tremor of my hand, every stammered syllable. He saw the tragic loss of a man he loved, the slow, cruel theft of his father's mind and body. Vivianne, too, played her part beautifully at first. She was all wide, sympathetic eyes, gentle touches, and soft words. "Oh, Arthur, we'll take care of you. We'll get you the best help." Her voice dripped with concern, a honeyed poison. But even then, I caught it, that micro-expression, a fleeting shadow of annoyance, a tightening around her flawless lips that vanished before Ethan could see it. The house became my stage, my sanctuary, my prison, and my recording studio. I'm a practical man, always have been. Even in my former life, when I was negotiating multi-million-dollar deals or dealing with less savory business partners, I always had a backup, a discreet recorder in my pocket, a hidden camera in my office. People say the darndest things when they think no one's listening, or when they think the person listening is too incapacitated to understand. Before I fully descended into my act, I spent days installing them. Tiny, almost invisible microphones, disguised as smoke detectors, decorative ornaments, even embedded in the base of a lamp. Motion-activated, sound-activated, feeding directly to a secure server Jess had set up for me. Every word spoken in my living room, in the dining room, in the kitchen, in the hallway leading to my bedroom, it would all be captured. A digital fortress of truth, waiting to be unleashed. I looked at the small, blinking red lights as I tested them, hidden in plain sight. They were my eyes, my ears, my silent witnesses. They were my shield, and they would be my sword. The trap was set. The bait was me, and the waiting began. The transition wasn't immediate, but it was relentless, like a slow-moving glacier carving out a valley. I didn't just wake up one morning a helpless invalid. That wouldn't have been believable. The diagnosis spoke of a progressive condition, something that would gradually steal my motor skills, my speech, my cognitive functions. A cruel, drawn-out fade. It gave Vivianne and Ethan time to adjust, to absorb the shock, and for Vivianne, crucial time to let her guard down. The first few weeks were taxing. Physically, it was demanding to mimic the tremors, the labored breathing, the way muscles betray you. Mentally, it was a constant battle against boredom and the urge to simply do something, to stand, to speak clearly, to argue. But I held fast. This wasn't about comfort. It was about conviction. I started spending more time in the wheelchair. At first, it was for mobility issues, then for weakness, until eventually it became my permanent perch. My speech deteriorated, turning into a mumbled soup of words, sometimes coherent, more often not. My gaze, once sharp and piercing, became unfocused, distant. I'd stare blankly at the wall or out the window, occasionally letting out a soft sigh or a groan of apparent discomfort. Ethan, poor kid, was a wreck. His visits were tinged with a deep, heart-wrenching sadness. He'd sit beside me, holding my hand, his thumb tracing patterns on my knuckles, his eyes welling up with tears. He'd try to engage me in conversation, asking about his work, about the wedding plans, about anything that might spark a flicker of recognition. And I'd respond with a nod, a weak smile, or a garbled sound that meant nothing, but was enough to confirm his worst fears. He saw his father, the bedrock of his life, crumbling before his eyes. It was agonizing to watch, and even more agonizing to inflict. Every tear he shed felt like a dagger to my own heart, but had to be done. For his future, Vivianne, during these initial weeks, was still operating on full charm offensive. She'd bring me warm blankets, help Ethan push my chair, offer to read to me from books I supposedly loved. "Oh, Arthur, how are you feeling today? Ethan worries so much about you." Her voice was soft, melodic, brimming with a counterfeit empathy. She'd stroke my forehead, a gesture that felt more like she was checking for a fever than offering comfort. And with every saccharine word, every feigned sigh, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten further. My internal mainframe was working overtime, processing every subtle cue. The tiny microphones, hidden so cleverly throughout the house, were my silent companions. They whirred almost imperceptibly, capturing every whisper, every slammed door, every hushed phone call. I knew they were working. I'd set up a discreet monitor in my room, disguised as an old digital photo frame, that would give me a quick coded status report. A green light meant recording, a red meant an issue. It was always green. One afternoon, about a month into my performance, Vivianne was alone with me. Ethan was at the office, caught up in a major project. She was supposed to be helping me with my physical therapy, a series of simple stretches that I, in my current state, couldn't perform myself. She'd already complained about having to cancel a yoga class. "It's just so much, Arthur. I mean, Ethan barely has time, and planning a wedding, plus this." She trailed off, then caught herself, realizing I was listening. She forced a smile. "But of course, we're here for you. Family." She grabbed my arm a little too roughly, pulling it into a stretch that bordered on painful. My face remained blank, my eyes distant. She sighed, a sound that conveyed deep annoyance, not compassion. "Honestly, this is just a lot. You really need full-time care, a facility. It's not fair to Ethan." She wasn't speaking to me, not really. She was speaking into the empty air, venting her frustration, believing her words would be swallowed by the silence and my incapacity. But the microphones were listening. Oh, they were always listening. This was the first genuine crack, the first hint of the resentment brewing beneath her polished exterior. It was small, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, but to me, it was a shout. The trap was indeed closing. As the weeks bled into months, Vivianne began to assert her authority more and more. Ethan, overwhelmed with work and wedding preparations, started relying on her to manage my care. She'd make decisions about my meals, bland, unappetizing fare, often cold, or my schedule, pushing my physical therapy sessions to inconvenient times or skipping them entirely. She'd forget to give me my medication on time or simply place the water glass just out of my reach, watching my futile attempts to grasp it with an almost clinical detachment. "Oh, Art," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake concern, "you're being so difficult today. You need to cooperate if you want to get better, you know." Her eyes, however, held a different message. "You're a bother. A nuisance. Get out of my way." The house started to feel less like a home and more like a carefully controlled environment. My movements were restricted. I couldn't be left alone, ostensibly for my safety. But it also meant I was always under her watchful, disdainful eye. One evening, I managed a brief, coded exchange with Jess. She called, ostensibly to check on Mr. Blackwood's health. Ethan took the call in the kitchen, not wanting to disturb me. Jess, as instructed, asked about my progress, using a prearranged phrase that meant, "Is the subject showing signs of true colors?" "He's stable, Jess," Ethan said, his voice weary. "But it's a long road." It's been a godsend, though. I don't know what I'd do without her. I see, Jess replied, her voice neutral. And is everything else stable? The arrangements? This was her query about my ongoing recording. Yes, as stable as can be, considering, Ethan said, completely oblivious to the subtext. Later that night, when Vivianne was out for a charity dinner and Ethan was asleep, I got out of my wheelchair, a silent, agile phantom in the moonlight. I moved to my hidden console, checking the recordings. Hour after hour of mundane sounds, interspersed with Vivianne's clipped comments, her condescending tone, her thinly veiled contempt. It was all there. Every sigh of exasperation, every harsh word whispered under her breath, every instance of neglect. The raw fury I felt was a cold, hard knot in my chest. To be treated this way, to watch this woman, this parasite, prey on my son's love and my simulated helplessness, it tested every fiber of my being. My hands, still calloused, clenched into fists, the phantom pains of my engineered weakness replaced by a very real, burning anger. The urge to rise, to throw off this pathetic charade, to expose her then and there, was almost overwhelming. But then I thought of Ethan, of his trusting face, his innocent love. This wasn't just about proving Vivianne was a gold digger. It was about inoculating my son against this kind of poison for good. It was about forging his character, painful as it would be. He needed to see it, to hear it, to understand it, so that he would never again confuse a beautiful facade with a beautiful soul. I returned to my wheelchair, letting out a carefully rehearsed, labored sigh. The act continued. The recordings continued. And the truth, piece by agonizing piece, was slowly, meticulously being collected. I knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. Vivianne was just getting started, and so was I. The months that followed weren't just a test of Vivianne's character. They were a cruel, drawn-out experiment in human endurance for me. Each day felt like another turn of the screw, tightening the pressure, chipping away at my composure. The initial cracks in Vivianne's facade widened into gaping chasms when Ethan wasn't around. Her care transformed into open neglect, her forced sympathy into thinly veiled contempt, her patience into outright cruelty. She started with the small things. The cold coffee left just out of my reach. The remote control placed just far enough away that my weak arms couldn't quite grasp it. The meals, bland and unappetizing, often pushed aside because I wasn't hungry, despite my barely audible attempts to communicate otherwise. I, the man who once commanded rooms, now had to suffer the indignity of having my most basic needs ignored by a woman half my age, whose sole qualification was a pretty face and a talent for deception. The physical abuse wasn't overt, not at first. It was insidious, deniable. A wheelchair pushed too fast over a threshold, causing a jolt that sent a jolt of pain through my back. An arm grabbed too roughly, leaving a faint bruise that I attributed to my frailty. A pillow pulled too forcefully from beneath my head during the night, waking me with a start and a simulated moan of discomfort. She'd always manage a saccharine apology. "Oh, Arthur, I'm so sorry. I'm just so clumsy today." But her eyes, cold and hard, told a different story. They told me she enjoyed it. I had to fight my own body's instincts. To flinch, to recoil, to snap back. My muscles screamed at me to tense, to resist, to push back against her cruel carelessness. My mind raged, reminding me of the countless times I'd dealt with far worse, far more overtly dangerous individuals. And yet here I was, feigning impotence in the face of a woman who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the world I once inhabited. The anger was a constant, simmering boil beneath my placid, distant exterior. It was a fight to keep my face expressionless, my eyes unfocused, my mouth slack. Every indignity felt like a personal insult, a deliberate act of desecration against the man I truly was. But then I'd think of Ethan, of the image he had of Vivianne, of the future he envisioned, and the rage would cool, hardening into resolve. This was the price of truth, the price of protecting my son. Every cold meal, every rough shove, every dismissive word was another piece of evidence, Another nail in Vivianne's meticulously crafted coffin of lies. The recordings, of course, were my secret solace. They were my silent, unblinking eyes and ears. Every dismissive sigh, every derogatory comment, every thinly veiled threat, they were all captured. Vivianne, growing bolder and more confident in my incapacity, began to speak more freely. Honestly, Ethan, she'd say in her phone, pacing just out of my line of sight, her voice hushed but venomous. Your father is becoming impossible. He's like a child. A very large, very inconvenient child. And this smell, honestly, I don't know how much more I can take. She was referring to the faint odor of antiseptic, a deliberate touch I'd added to my routine to enhance the illusion of my medical needs. We have to get him into a facility. It's for his own good. And ours. Another time, while helping me in the bathroom, a particularly humiliating experience I forced myself through for the sake of the act, she muttered, "You know, if you weren't so present, this whole thing would be much easier. Ethan and I could just live our lives. Your money would be much more useful without you needing constant care." She didn't think I understood. She didn't think I could hear. But every syllable was clear, crisp, and damning, stored away on the secure server. I'd lie there, my eyes vacant, my breathing shallow, but inside, my mind was a furious kaleidoscope of calculations. She wasn't just cruel, she was strategic. She was laying the groundwork for moving me out, for taking full control. It wasn't enough for her to marry Ethan. She wanted to excise me from the picture entirely, to gain unfettered access to whatever wealth she believed I still possessed. She truly believed she had me, and Ethan wrapped around her manicured finger. The only breaks in this suffocating routine were my brief, coded calls with Jess. She'd call the house ostensibly to check on Mr. Blackwood's legal affairs, but truly to check on me. We'd have boilerplate conversations, Ethan usually on the line, but at certain points, prearranged questions would be slipped in. Mr. Blackwood, about the portfolio diversification. Are we seeing promising returns? Jess would ask, her voice perfectly professional. This was her asking if Vivianne was showing true colors, if the returns on my investment in this charade were proving worthwhile. The market is volatile, Jess, I'd stammer, my voice slurred. But long-term potential is strong. That meant, yes, she's revealing herself. The evidence is mounting. Jess, bless her cynical heart, would often sigh audibly when Ethan was off the phone for a moment. Art, you sure you want to keep this up? It sounds unpleasant. Unpleasant. I'd think, wishing I could speak freely. Unpleasant doesn't begin to cover it, Jess. It's a living hell. But the alternative is worse. Vivianne was subtly, but effectively, driving a wedge between Ethan and me. She'd suggest that my condition was making me difficult, implying my outbursts were the cause of strain. She'd deflect Ethan's questions about my care with tales of my stubbornness or confusion. Ethan, caught between his love for me and his love for her, grew increasingly weary, his face etched with worry. He didn't want to believe she was anything but perfect. He needed her to be perfect. It was a slow, agonizing process. Each day chipped away at my pretense of helplessness, forcing me to dig deeper into my resolve. I wanted to end it, to stand up, to rip the mask off and shout. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't convince Ethan. He needed to see it with his own eyes, hear it with his own ears, undeniable and unvarnished. He needed to be shattered, yes, but then he needed to be rebuilt, stronger and wiser. The silence of my illness was a heavy cloak, but underneath, I was a coiled spring, gathering tension, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash the storm. The recordings were piling up, a damning symphony of cruelty and avarice. And as Vivianne grew more comfortable in her monstrousness, she was setting herself up for a fall far steeper and more spectacular than she could ever imagine. I just had to wait for the right moment. The game was far from over. It was merely entering its most dangerous phase. The longer I lay there, trapped in my simulated prison, the more my mind drifted back. Not just to the recordings, to Vivianne's latest calculated cruelty, but to the shadows of my own past. To a time when I, too, had been blinded by ambition, by trust, by a superficial charm that masked a viper's heart. It was a lesson learned at immense cost, a scar that still throbbed, even decades later. My empire, the one Ethan thought was just a successful architectural firm, was far more complex. Blackwood Holdings wasn't built on blueprints alone. It was built on grit, on ruthless negotiation, on knowing when to shake a hand and when to snap a neck. I'd started small, a kid from a tough neighborhood, pushing wheelbarrows on construction sites. But I saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. I had an instinct for land, for timing, for the subtle currents of power that flowed beneath the gleaming surface of New York City. I built apartment complexes, then entire districts. I diversified into logistics, then finance. There were deals struck in dimly lit back rooms, alliances forged with men whose names you wouldn't find in the society pages. It was a world of high stakes, where a handshake was sometimes worth more than a signed contract, and betrayal was just another cost of doing business. I learned to read people like an open book, to spot the tells, the subtle shifts in gaze, the nervous ticks, the greedy flicker in their eyes. That's how I met Lawrence Thorne. Charming, eloquent, impeccably dressed. He was the kind of man who could talk you into anything with a smile and a promise. He had connections, a polished veneer that a rough diamond found intriguing. We partnered on a massive waterfront development project. It was going to be my legacy, the capstone of my career. And he, Lawrence, became my trusted right-hand man, almost a brother. Then came the crash. Not a market crash, but a calculated, deliberate sabotage. Millions vanished. Permits revoked. Our biggest investor pulled out. The entire project collapsed, taking years of my work, my reputation, and nearly everything I owned with it. Lawrence, of course, vanished too, leaving me to face the music, the lawsuits, the creditors. He reappeared years later, living a lavish life in Barbados, having siphoned off funds through shell corporations I never knew existed. I almost went bankrupt. The stress almost killed my wife. It certainly broke something inside me. It broke my trust. I rebuilt, of course. Stronger, wiser, colder. I never again allowed myself to be so vulnerable, so trusting. I learned to always have a backup plan, an insurance policy, a quiet recording device in my pocket. That experience, that brutal education, was why I couldn't ignore my gut feeling about Vivianne. It was the same polished facade, the same subtle greed, the same predatory gleam. She was a smaller fish, perhaps, but the shark was still there, swimming beneath the surface. While I was reliving these ghosts, Jess was busy unearthing Vivianne's own shadows. Her weekly legal updates became increasingly loaded with information. Mr. Blackwood, we found some interesting discrepancies regarding your property taxes. Nothing major, of course, but it seems there was a slight oversight in reporting some assets. This was Jess's coded way of telling me she'd found something about Vivianne's finances. Jess's network was as vast and discreet as my own, built over years of protecting powerful, sometimes unsavory, clients. She didn't just handle legal disputes, she handled problems. The discrepancies turned out to be far more than a slight oversight. Vivianne, it seemed, had a history of financial instability despite her public image. Several maxed-out credit cards, a small, inherited property in Florida with a hefty mortgage she couldn't quite afford, and a few dubious investments that turned out to be little more than speculative gambling. She wasn't from old money. She was trying to buy her way into it, and Ethan was her golden ticket. There were whispers, too, of a previous engagement that had ended abruptly, with the wealthy fiancé suddenly cutting ties after discovering some unpleasant truths. Jess hadn't pinned down the exact nature of those truths yet, but the pattern was emerging, clear as day. Vivianne wasn't just looking for love. She was looking for a rescue, a permanent solution to her financial woes. Ethan, bless his idealistic heart, remained largely oblivious. He saw what he wanted to see. He'd occasionally catch a glimpse of Vivianne's impatience, a sharp word directed at me, or a roll of her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. He'd frown, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, But Vivianne was a master manipulator. She'd immediately turn on the charm, blaming wedding stress or worry about your father, or even subtly implying that my condition was making me difficult to be around. He just needs consistency, Ethan, she'd say, placing a comforting hand on his arm, her eyes wide with feigned concern. But sometimes Arthur is, well, he gets confused. It's hard for him. And Ethan, wanting so desperately to believe in her, would nod, his anxieties assuaged, his doubts buried under a fresh layer of love and guilt. He felt guilty for even questioning her. He felt guilty for leaving me in her care. He was trapped in a web of his own making, spun by a spider he adored. The wedding date was fast approaching. 3 weeks out. The invitations had been sent, the venue booked, an exclusive country club in the Hamptons, Vivianne's choice, naturally, with a price tag that made my eyes water, even in my disabled state. She was planning the wedding of the year, a showcase of her refined taste and impending ascension into the upper echelons of society. It was time to move. My act had gathered enough material, enough damning evidence. Her cruelty had escalated, becoming almost brazen. The mental and physical toll on me was immense, but the finish line was in sight. I began to craft the grand finale. This wouldn't be a quiet conversation, a gentle unveiling. This would be a demolition, a public, undeniable exposure that would leave no room for doubt, no opportunity for her to spin her web of lies again. It needed to be impactful, dramatic, and utterly devastating. It needed to be a moment Ethan would never, ever forget. My illness had provided me with an unexpected advantage. People, especially Vivianne, were completely disarmed. They saw me as harmless, an empty shell. They spoke freely around me, confident in my inability to understand or react. This was the perfect cover for my final preparations. I started making subtle, almost imperceptible adjustments to my routine. A flicker of clarity in my eyes for a fraction of a second when Vivianne wasn't looking directly at me. A slightly stronger grip when Ethan held my hand. Small seeds of doubt, designed to fester in the subconscious of anyone paying close enough attention. The stage was set. The players were in position. The recordings were ready. And the time for the silent, patient hunter to become the avenging predator was drawing near. Vivianne, in her hubris, had become complacent. She thought she had won, but she was about to learn a very expensive lesson. A lesson I had learned decades ago and had paid for in blood, sweat, and tears. And now, she would pay her own. The air in the house grew thick with a palpable tension as the wedding day approached. 2 weeks. Every moment felt charged, every interaction a subtle dance of power. Vivianne, sensing victory, grew bolder, her true nature emerging from beneath the last vestiges of her polite facade. She was already mentally spending Ethan's money, reimagining her life without the inconvenient burden of his disabled father. The discussions about my future escalated. They were no longer hushed phone calls. They were direct confrontations with Ethan. "Honey, we simply cannot have your father living here after the wedding," she declared one evening over a meticulously prepared, organic, and ridiculously overpriced meal. I sat at the table, my head slightly slumped, a barely touched plate of pureed vegetables before me, playing the role of the drooling, oblivious old man. Ethan, his face a mask of conflict, tried to reason. "Vivianne, he's my father. This is his home. We can hire full-time nurses, a care team." Vivianne cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand, a gesture laced with exasperation. "A care team? Here? In our home? Ethan, darling, we're starting our life together. Our new life. We need space, privacy. We can't have this constantly looming over us. It's not fair to us." The emphasis on us was a finely honed weapon, designed to make him feel guilty for considering my needs over hers. "Besides," she continued, her voice hardening, "I spoke with Dr. Davies again. He agrees that a specialized facility where Arthur can receive round-the-clock professional care would be far better for his condition. More stimulating, more appropriate. It's what he needs." She cited my fabricated doctor, effectively using my own trap against me. The irony was almost amusing, if it weren't so infuriating. Ethan looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for some sign of understanding, some agreement. I met his gaze with a vacant stare, a slow, meaningless blink. He sighed, defeated, caught between the woman he loved and the father he was slowly losing. He was being worn down, systematically, day by day. Then came the ultimatum. A few days later, while Ethan was away on a final business trip before the wedding, Vivianne decided it was time to put me in my place. She walked into my room, where I was resting, pretending to sleep. She didn't bother with the soft words or the fake concern. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of the room like a razor. "All right, Arthur, listen up, because even if you can't respond, I know you hear me. The game is over." She stood over my wheelchair, her hands on her hips, a sneer twisting her beautiful face. "Ethan is sending out the final checks for the facility. You'll be moved by the end of next week, just in time for our honeymoon. Convenient, isn't it?" She paused, as if savoring the moment. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you. Almost. Stuck like this. Unable to do anything. Unable to speak. Watching everything slip through your fingers while I get everything." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "That little nest egg of yours? It's going to be put to much better use." My use. Ethan's too naive to invest it properly, you know. He's always been such a sentimental fool. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, controlled fury. She wasn't just talking about my money. She was talking about Ethan, dismissing him, mocking his very nature. This wasn't just greed. This was malice. She picked up a framed photograph from my bedside table, a picture of my late wife, taken years ago, her smile warm and gentle, a stark contrast to the venomous expression on Vivianne's face. "And this," she said, tapping the glass with a perfectly manicured nail, "this outdated sentimentality. It will all be gone. Cleared out. We're redecorating. New beginnings, Arthur. Fresh start. No reminders of difficult times." She tossed the photograph back onto the table with a careless clatter. It landed face down. A profound, primal rage surged through me. That photograph wasn't just a picture. It was a memory, a sacred relic of the one person I had ever loved unconditionally, the one person who knew the real me and loved me for it. To see it treated with such callous disregard, it was the ultimate desecration. It was the moment. The final, definitive, irreversible line had been crossed. The game was no longer about strategy. It was about retribution. I lay there, utterly still, but inside, a switch flipped. The quiet hum of my hidden recorders seemed to amplify, absorbing every hateful word. My mind, which had been meticulously cataloging every slight, every insult, every act of cruelty, now began to compile the final sequence of the execution. Vivianne leaned closer, her breath smelling faintly of expensive perfume and cheap malice. "You know, the hardest part wasn't pretending to care about your health. It was pretending to actually like Ethan's taste. This house, so drab, so predictable, but soon will be mine, ours. And your little boy, he'll never know what hit him. He'll think I'm his savior, his angel. And you, Arthur, you'll be just another forgotten old man in a forgotten room." She straightened up, a triumphant smirk on her face, convinced she had delivered the perfect coup de grace. "So, enjoy your last few days here. Because the moment Ethan says, 'I do,' your new life begins. And believe me, it won't be pretty." She turned to leave, her heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floor, a victor departing the field of battle. As she reached the door, I, in my incapacitated state, let out a sound. It wasn't a moan or a garble. It was a guttural, almost animalistic noise that stopped her dead in her tracks. She turned, a flicker of irritation, then perhaps a sliver of fear crossing her face. My eyes, usually vacant, met hers. For a split second, I allowed a sliver of the old art blackwood to shine through, a glint of cold steel, a hint of calculating intelligence. Just enough for her to feel a prickle of unease, a fleeting doubt that she quickly dismissed as her imagination, a dying man's last gasp. My lips, slack with paralysis, managed to form a word, a single, barely audible syllable, twisted and distorted, but clear enough for me. Done. She frowned, shaking her head. Such nonsense, she muttered, and then she was gone. But it wasn't nonsense. It was a signal. For her, it was the incoherent ramblings of a dying man. For me, it was the activation code. The game wasn't just over. It was time for the final act. And Vivianne Sterling was about to discover that some old men, even those in wheelchairs, still had teeth. And those teeth were about to rip her perfect world apart. The week leading up to the big day was a whirlwind. Vivianne, buoyed by her perceived victory, was almost manic in her preparations. Caterers, florists, event planners, they all descended upon the house, transforming it into a hub of controlled chaos. I, the ailing patriarch, remained in my room, ostensibly too weak to participate, but in reality, observing every detail, every casual conversation. Ethan, though still heartbroken over my impending move to a facility, seemed to have accepted Vivianne's relentless logic. He visited me often, his eyes full of sorrow, whispering apologies. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I truly think this is for the best. For everyone." He'd hold my hand, his grip firm, and I'd squeeze back just a fraction more than my condition should allow. Just enough for a subconscious signal, a seed of doubt. I had arranged for the family meeting under the guise of wanting one last normal gathering before the wedding and my transition. Vivianne, ever the opportunist, saw it as a chance to cement her status and parade her soon-to-be husband before her associates. She invited her parents, a couple of her closest friends from the gallery, and, of course, Ethan and myself. Jess would also be there, posing as my legal counsel for some last-minute paperwork, a role Vivianne tolerated but didn't particularly like. The evening arrived, draped in the false promise of conviviality. The dining room, usually a quiet space, buzzed with forced laughter and polite chatter. Vivianne, radiant in a silk dress, held court, charming everyone with her effortless grace. Her parents, a pair of slightly bewildered social climbers, beamed with pride. Ethan, handsome in a tailored suit, seemed a little distant, preoccupied. I sat at the head of the table, my wheelchair positioned carefully, a bib around my neck, my eyes wide and unfocused, my mouth slightly agape, the perfect image of a man utterly lost to the world. Dinner progressed. Vivianne spun tales of her charity work, her impeccable taste, her devotion to Ethan, and, with a saccharine glance my way, her tireless care for me. Each lie, each carefully constructed falsehood, felt like a nail scraping across a chalkboard to my ears, but I maintained my blank facade. The game was almost over. After dessert, as coffee was being served, Vivianne, basking in the glow of adoration, turned to Ethan. "Darling, maybe we should tell everyone about the new arrangement for Arthur. They're all so supportive." Ethan flinched slightly, but nodded. "Yes, well, Dad will be moving to the Westboro facility next week. It's a wonderful place, state-of-the-art." He spoke haltingly, his gaze darting between Vivianne and me, seeking reassurance that wasn't there. This was my cue. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the deepest I had drawn in months. My hand, which had been resting limply on the armrest, slowly, almost imperceptibly, clenched into a fist. The room was quiet, waiting for Ethan to finish. "Actually, son," I said, my voice, though still rough from disuse, was clear, strong. It cut through the polite murmurs like a finely honed blade. Every head at the table snapped towards me. Vivianne, mid-sip of her espresso, froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. Ethan stared, his jaw slack. My voice, full and resonant, was the sound of a miracle or a nightmare, depending on who was listening. "The Westbrook facility won't be necessary." Vivianne's cup clattered against the saucer, spilling coffee onto the pristine white tablecloth. Her eyes, usually so calculating, were now wide with a dawning horror. "Arthur, what are you doing?" Her voice was a strangled whisper. I looked directly at her, and for the first time in months she saw the real Art Blackwood. The steel in my gaze, the raw intelligence that had built an empire, the chilling clarity of purpose. I'm merely clarifying the arrangements, Vivianne. I pushed myself up slightly in the wheelchair, a small but significant shift that indicated strength, not weakness. She stammered, trying to regain control. Ethan, your father, he's confused. He's at a moment. No, Vivianne, I interrupted, my voice rising slightly, gaining authority. I'm not confused. I've never been clearer in my life. I then turned my head, just slightly, towards a decorative vase on the mantelpiece, a vase she herself had chosen. Jess, if you would be so kind. Jess, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, her face a mask of calm professionalism, nodded. She pulled a small, sleek tablet from her briefcase. With a deft flick of her wrist, she activated it. From the elegant speakers hidden discreetly in the room, a voice filled the silence. Vivianne's voice, hushed, irritated, laced with contempt. Honestly, Ethan, your father is becoming impossible. He's like a child. A very large, very inconvenient child. And this smell, honestly, I don't know how much more I can take. We have to get him into a facility. It's for his own good. And ours. A gasp went around the table. Vivianne's parents looked horrified. Ethan, who had been half standing, slowly sank back in his chair, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Vivianne. Vivianne's composure shattered. What is this? This is doctored. This is a trick. She lunged towards Jess, but Jess, anticipating the move, smoothly stepped back. A trick? I said, my voice now perfectly clear, perfectly controlled. Vivianne, darling, you always underestimate my fondness for documentation. Jess clicked another file. This time, it was my therapy session where Vivianne had deliberately hurt me. The sound of a harsh pull, my simulated moan of pain, followed by her callous, dismissive words. You know, if you weren't so present, this whole thing would be much easier. Ethan and I could just live our lives. Your money would be much more useful without you needing constant care. The room was utterly silent, save for Vivianne's recorded voice, echoing her true, ugly nature. Ethan's eyes, fixed on her, filled with a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and dawning horror. Impossible, Vivianne whispered, her face ashen. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. Arthur, please. This isn't real. You're sick. You're imagining things. I slowly pushed myself forward in the wheelchair, my gaze never leaving hers. Am I, Vivianne? Because what I'm about to show you is very, very real. Jess then activated the final recording from a few days prior. The one where Vivianne stood over me, reveling in my supposed helplessness, dismissing my son as a sentimental fool, and threatening to discard the last tangible memory of my late wife. The recording played. Her harsh laugh. Her cruel words. You know, the hardest part wasn't pretending to care about your health. It was pretending to actually like Ethan's taste. This house. So drab. So predictable. But soon it will be mine. Ours. And your little boy? He'll never know what hit him. He'll think I'm his savior, his angel. And you, Arthur? You'll be just another forgotten old man in a forgotten room. Then, the sound of the photograph clattering onto the table. And my barely audible, distorted whisper, done. The sound died. The silence in the room was deafening, suffocating. Ethan finally broke it. His voice was a guttural growl, filled with pain and raw fury. Vivianne, what have you done? He looked at her as if he'd never seen her before. And in that moment, he hadn't. He was seeing the monster beneath the mask. I looked at Vivianne, her face now completely devoid of color, her eyes darting frantically, trapped. No, Vivianne, I said, my voice now strong, resonant, filled with the authority of a man who had finally unleashed his wrath. What you have done is revealed who you truly are. To everyone. Then, with a strength that belied my earlier performance, I pushed myself up from the wheelchair. Slowly, deliberately, I stood. My legs, though a little stiff, supported me perfectly. My back straightened. My head, which had been slumped, rose, and my eyes, now piercing and unblinking, fixed on Vivianne. I was never sick, Vivianne, I said, my voice echoing with an almost biblical gravitas. It was all an act, A test. And you, my dear, failed spectacularly. Vivian gasped, taking an involuntary step back, as if a ghost had risen from the dead. Her perfect world, her meticulously planned future, was crumbling around her, not with a bang, but with the undeniable, horrifying clarity of her own recorded words. The hunt was over. The trap had sprung, and the prey was caught. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of shock. Vivianne, her face a ghastly white, stared at me as if I were a specter risen from the grave. Her perfect facade, which had held for so long, finally crumbled, revealing the raw fear and venom beneath. Ethan sat stunned, his gaze oscillating between me, his miraculously recovered father, and Vivianne, his now exposed fiancée. Her parents were a study in silent, mortified horror. Her friends looked bewildered, then quickly averted their eyes, sensing the imminent social catastrophe. "No, this is impossible," Vivianne stammered, her voice thin, reedy, completely devoid of its usual melodic charm. You can't, you were." I took a slow, deliberate step away from the wheelchair, letting it stand empty behind me, a silent testament to the lie. "I was exactly what you wanted me to be, Vivianne. A helpless, inconvenient old man. A mark, an obstacle. And you, in your boundless ambition and bottomless cruelty, believed every minute of it." My voice was calm, but each word was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Jess stepped forward, her tablet still in hand. "Mr. Blackwood is of sound mind and body, Vivianne. The medical reports you saw were, shall we say, creatively interpreted, and the recordings you just heard are all authentic, time-stamped, and securely backed up, as are countless others. Weeks, even months, of your private thoughts and actions." Vivianne's eyes darted from Jess to me, then to Ethan. She saw no flicker of doubt in Ethan's eyes, only a profound, heartbreaking realization. The love in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, searing anger. "This is entrapment. This is illegal," she shrieked, her carefully cultivated composure completely vanishing. Her voice was shrill, ugly, the true sound of a cornered animal. I gave a slight, dismissive shrug. "Entrapment? Dear girl, you trapped yourself. I merely provided the stage. As for legality, recording conversations in one's own home, especially when one is being subjected to neglect and potential abuse, tends to be rather permissible, especially when said recordings also happen to capture discussions of financial malfeasance and defamation of character." That last part hit her. Her eyes widened even further, a new wave of fear washing over her face. "What are you talking about?" "Jess," I prompted, "if you'd be so kind as to elaborate on Ms. Sterling's extracurricular activities." Jess clicked a few buttons on her tablet. "Through the course of our investigation into Mr. Blackwood's family matters, we uncovered certain irregularities in Ms. Sterling's personal finances. A pattern, if you will. Several significant outstanding debts, questionable investments in defunct offshore accounts, and a rather concerning history of acquiring substantial gifts from previous romantic partners, often under duress or false pretenses. One such instance, involving a Mr. Richard Thorne from Boston, ended with a rather hefty settlement on his part to avoid a public scandal involving allegations of professional misconduct." Vivianne's face was now a sickly shade of green. Richard Thorne was a name from Jess's earlier coded reports. I now understood the full depth of Vivianne's predatory nature. She was not just a gold digger. She was a serial opportunist, willing to leverage any situation for personal gain, regardless of the emotional or financial cost to others. You investigated me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My son's future was at stake," I said, my voice unwavering. "And when my gut screams, I listen, and then I act." Ethan, who had been silent through this secondary revelation, finally spoke, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "You planned all of this? The money? The investments? Was any of it real, Vivianne? Or was I just your next target?" She tried to reach for him, a desperate, last-ditch attempt at manipulation. "Ethan, darling, no. It's not like that. I love you. This is all a misunderstanding." Your father is a cruel man. He's trying to destroy us. I scoffed. Destroy us? Vivianne, you are already doing an admirable job of that on your own. You see, Ethan, my financial worth is considerably more substantial than you, or indeed Vivianne, ever realized. The architectural firm? That's just one small branch of Blackwood Holdings. My true assets, the ones I shielded from public view, the ones I built from the ground up through decades of relentless work, are managed through a series of trusts and private investments. A portfolio that would dwarf any wealth you could ever imagine. I paused, letting that sink in. The shock on Vivianne's face was priceless. The realization that she hadn't just lost a wealthy fiancé, but an unimaginable fortune, hit her like a physical blow. And guess what, Vivianne? I continued, my voice now tinged with a cold satisfaction. Your name, darling, will never be associated with a single penny of it. In fact, due to the rather convincing evidence of your neglect, verbal abuse, and potential financial misconduct, now sitting in Jess's tablet, I intend to ensure that not only will you receive nothing from my family, but your meticulously crafted reputation will be thoroughly dismantled. Every social circle you've painstakingly infiltrated will hear these recordings. Every charity board will know the truth. And those discrepancies in your past, they'll become very public, very quickly. Vivianne stood there, utterly broken. The queen of her self-made kingdom was dethroned, stripped bare, her crown shattered. Her parents, sensing the utter catastrophe, started to murmur apologies, grabbing Vivianne's arm. Vivianne, we have to go. Now. And the wedding? Ethan asked, his voice still shaking, but with a newfound strength, a hardening edge I had never heard before. Vivianne could only manage a choked sob, tears finally streaming down her ruined face. There will be no wedding, I stated unequivocally. Not with her. Ethan deserves better. He deserves someone real. Vivianne, her face contorted in a mask of impotent fury and despair, finally broke free from her parents' grasp and ran from the dining room, her frantic footsteps echoing through the house. Her parents mumbled another apology and quickly followed, their faces etched with humiliation. The door slammed shut, signaling the end of her reign. The room was left in a stunned silence. Only Ethan and I remained, Jess standing discreetly by. The silence was thick with unspoken words, shattered illusions, and the bitter taste of truth. The idol had fallen, and its pieces lay scattered, sharp and dangerous, on the pristine dining room floor. But the war wasn't truly over. Not yet. Not until Ethan processed what he had just witnessed. The silence that followed Vivianne's panicked exit was far heavier than the cacophony of her recorded cruelty. It hung in the air, oppressive and suffocating, thick with shattered dreams and the lingering stench of betrayal. Ethan sat slumped in his chair, his eyes fixed on the empty space where Vivianne had stood, his perfect world lying in jagged pieces around him. His face, usually so open and kind, was a mask of raw pain and disbelief. I watched him, my heart aching with a father's profound sorrow. This was the moment I had dreaded, the part of the plan that cut me deepest. To inflict such pain on my own son, to witness the light dim in his eyes as his illusions were cruelly ripped away. But it was necessary. A surgeon makes an incision to remove a cancer, knowing the healing will be painful, but ultimately life-saving. Son, I said, my voice softer now, devoid of the steel I had used on Vivianne. Ethan, he finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and brimming with unshed tears. Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. Why? Why didn't you just tell me? Why all of this? He gestured vaguely at the empty wheelchair, the still active tablet Jess held, the entire elaborate deception. I rose from the table and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. My touch was firm, grounding, the touch of a father, not a feeble invalid. Because, Ethan, you wouldn't have believed me. Not then. You were too deep in it. You saw what you wanted to see, not what was truly there. And Vivianne, she was too good at her game. She would have twisted every word, spun every accusation into a narrative of my supposed illness, my paranoia, my desire to sabotage your happiness. I knelt beside him, bringing myself to his eye level. Sometimes, son, the truth is so ugly, so painful, that you have to experience it, taste it, feel it, for it to truly sink in. I knew what she was. I've seen her type before. I lost too much once because I ignored that gut feeling, because I trusted someone I shouldn't have. I swore I would never let that happen to you. I couldn't stand by and watch her slowly, systematically dismantle your life from the inside out. He shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. But to pretend to be so sick, to let me believe, his voice broke. I thought I was losing you. I thought you were fading away. That was the hardest part, Ethan. I admitted, my own voice thick with emotion. Every tear you shed, every worried glance, it was a dagger to my heart. But it was the only way to expose her without leaving any doubt. To create a situation where she felt so utterly uninhibited, so supremely confident in her control, that she would reveal her true colors without reservation. And she did. I squeezed his shoulder gently. Pain, son, is a brutal teacher, but it's often the most effective one. You needed to see the monster, not just hear about it. You needed to hear her dismiss you, mock your kindness, desecrate your mother's memory, to truly understand the depth of her depravity. He closed his eyes, taking a shuddering breath. When he opened them again, some of the raw pain was still there, but it was now mixed with a burgeoning understanding, a slow, dawning comprehension. She would have taken everything, wouldn't she? And more, I confirmed. She would have taken your trust, your kindness, your spirit. She would have left you a hollow shell. My money, that's just paper. Your soul, your heart, those are irreplaceable. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the revelations settling upon him. I let him process it, absorb the shock, begin the painful work of reorienting his world. He was seeing the truth, and it was devastating. But he was also seeing me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time in years. Not just the modest contractor father, but the architect of empires, the shrewd strategist, the protector. So, the business? He finally asked, his voice still hoarse. Blackwood Holdings? What are you? I smiled faintly. Let's just say the architectural firm is merely the visible tip of a much larger and far more complex iceberg. I built an empire, Ethan, one that was designed to be passed on, but only to someone worthy, someone who understands the value of honesty, loyalty, and discernment, someone who has learned to see beyond the pretty packaging. He nodded, a profound transformation slowly occurring in his eyes. The naive idealist was beginning to recede, replaced by a man forged in the fire of disillusionment, but hopefully also tempered with wisdom. What about Vivianne? He asked, his voice now colder, harder than I'd ever heard it. What happens to her? I leaned back, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. Vivianne Sterling will fade into obscurity, Ethan. Her carefully cultivated reputation, utterly destroyed. Jess has already made some discreet calls. The recordings will ensure that every door she tries to open in the circles she desperately craves will be slammed shut in her face. Her past financial improprieties will come to light, not in a way that generates headlines, but in a way that quietly, effectively, makes her unemployable, unbankable, and unwelcome in any reputable establishment. She'll be persona non grata, a social pariah. She won't face prison, perhaps, but she'll face something far worse for someone like her, irrelevance. And perhaps a few financial repercussions she won't be able to escape. He merely nodded, a grim set to his jaw. There was no joy in his voice, no sense of triumph, just a quiet, hard resolve. He wasn't celebrating her downfall. He was simply accepting justice. We spent the rest of the evening talking, truly talking, for the first time in years. I told him more about my past, about the lessons I'd learned, the battles I'd fought. He listened, rapt, his initial shock slowly giving way to a new understanding, a new respect. He saw the method in my madness, the profound love beneath the painful deception. The next day, the Hamptons' wedding was swiftly, quietly canceled. Vivianne disappeared from our lives as suddenly as she had appeared. leaving behind only the bitter taste of truth. Ethan, though wounded, was not broken. He was changed. He was stronger, wiser, his eyes now far more discerning. The idealism was still there, but now it was tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism, a newfound appreciation for integrity over superficiality. I eventually sold the old house. It had served its purpose, a stage for a painful, necessary drama. Ethan and I moved on, closer now, bound by a shared, difficult truth. He began to learn the true scope of Blackwood Holdings, not just the architectural firm, but the intricate web of businesses and investments. He would be ready, truly ready, to inherit it all, armed with a wisdom he would never have gained otherwise. I look at you now, my friend, and I can almost hear your unspoken question. Was it worth it? All the months of indignity, the pain I inflicted on my own son, the elaborate deception? I lean back, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. My hands, once feebly trembling, are steady now. My eyes, once vacant, are clear, sharp, and filled with the quiet confidence of a man who played a long game and won. Some people, I say, my voice raspy with years of stories untold, they believe love is blind. And perhaps it is for a time, but as a father, it was my duty to make sure my son's eyes were opened, even if that light of truth had to burn through the darkest of deceptions. Sometimes, to protect those you love, you have to play the cruelest of games. You have to become the bait. You have to endure the humiliation. But the price of truth, the enduring peace it brings, the foundation it lays for a stronger future, that, my friend, is always worth it. I look straight into the camera, a lifetime of experience etched into my face. Not all monsters wear horns. Some wear dazzling smiles. My job, as a father, was to teach my son the difference. And sometimes you just have to turn on the recorder and let the monster speak for itself.